Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Anisa Nabila Zamzami, and I am from International Relations student from Muhammadiyah University of Yogyakarta. Today, I want to present my paper presentation under the title Indonesian Students' Perspective on Election During a Pandemic COVID-19. My paper presentation have an outline that include introduction, method, result, discussion, and conclusion. Introduction. Indonesia is a democratic country that has regular elections every 5 years. In the year 2020, Indonesia will hold a simultaneous poll of regional leaders. On December 9, around 100 million Indonesians across the country's 270 regions will vote in regional elections. Indonesia is a country currently experiencing a demographic bonus. Therefore, young people make up the majority in voting in elections. Young people have a great power and have a big role during the election, especially those aged 17 until 24 years old, who enter students category. The elections are fair determined by the participation of young people. Some of the previous studies mostly investigate how the people's perspective in general about the election during the pandemic. There are still many research that haven't talked about young generation about this issue. However, the study tried to know how the prospective young people, especially students in Indonesia, about the election during the pandemic that still increased. The research was conducted to find out how Indonesian students' perspective about the election during the pandemic COVID-19. Specifically, the researchers interested in the following two questions that will guide the research. And the research question there are how do Indonesian perspective about the election during the pandemic? And the second, what is the impact if the election not delayed? Will the pandemic reduce a number of votes? And in the part literature review, there are a part of election definition and empirical review. According to Ginsburg and Hope, elections are mainstay feature and a basic predicate of democracy. The ability for countries to conduct election is further bolstered by a robust regime of human rights protection. Rights such as freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and freedom of speech. And in the empirical review, based on the research from Spinelli said to hold election amid the COVID-19 pandemic is associated with the level and types of tool and infrastructure available to create secure voting conditions. In the research method, the research used a qualitative method to know an overview of students in Indonesians' perspective about the election during the pandemic COVID-19. As the instrument for collecting the data, the research will use a Google form from the questionnaire spreading technique. And the qualitative method as the data collecting methodology, which was conducted on Indonesian students aged 19 until 1,000 years old, especially have a right voting. And And in the procedure on the questionnaire, the preachers will give some questions that relate about their issue. First section to gain the response from opinion relate about their opinion about the election during COVID-19 and will use some numerical scale range for 1 until 5. 1 for disagree, 2 for 1 for strongly disagree, 2 for disagree, 3 for neutral, and 4 for agree, and 5 for totally agree. The second section using the multiple choice question, which will contain some questions. After collecting the data, the research start to analyze all the form of the respondent. Then, the researchers make the conclusion based on the important point of the participant answer. And here are the result from the, the researchers get from the respondent. In this chart, we can see that 11 respondents from 32 strongly disagree if the government held the election during the pandemic COVID-19. The fourth bar chart is show the response the student in Indonesia agree or disagree if the government still had the elections. From the chat we know that 11 respondents choose scale 1, which is strongly disagree, and we could make a result that 11 respondents from 32 respondents disagree if the government held the election during the pandemic COVID-19. 9 respondents choose on scale 2, and 10 respondents choose scale 3, which is neutral, and 2 respondents choose scale 4. It means uh, agree. And the next pie chart, we can see that most of respondents still gave their vote even in this pandemic situation, with 56.3% and 25% from 32 respondents choose not give their vote because of pandemic. Moreover, another respondent give another reason in this situation. In the next, the last pie chart shows that the most of the respondents have an anxiety about the election during pandemic, with 71.9% vote from 32 respondents. Another minority didn't have a feeling about the election, and another respondent didn't have care about the election during the pandemic COVID-19. And the next is discussion. After conducting the survey of the majority of respondents choose to give their voting rights even during the pandemic. However, the respondents are also worried about their health when they join the election during pandemic COVID-19. The main finding of survey is students in Indonesia generally didn't agree if the election still held during pandemic COVID-19 and have a big anxiety and worry about their health. Students in Indonesia have realized the risk of COVID-19 with result 71.9% based on the questionnaire. Overall, most of the participants also mentioned that they need a good regulation to protect them during the pandemic and suggest to doing election with online voting and ask the government to give the vaccine and another response to election should be delayed. The results is in line with previous study, pandemic, democracy, election, and COVID-19 conducted by Landman. The author said that many risks posed by the COVID-19 pandemic are the conduct of genuine and transparent election in the world. From the survey results above, we can conclude that most of the participants are aware enough to their health. However, even the pandemic still around us, the most respondents still give their right vote if the election still be held. But they hope the government give the effective health protocol to protect them from the virus COVID-19. And the last is conclusion. In this research, the research got the opinion of number of participants. The research obtained the data from a number of participants who are Indonesian students aged 19 until 20 years old from different universities. The research concluded that majority of Indonesian students aware of the politics and health. The study affirmed that though doing election during pandemic have a big risk and isn't good regulation from government. On the other hand, the government should make an effective regulation and health protocol to keep the citizens still safe from COVID-19 during giving their vote in the election. Based on the finding of the research would recommend to the government of Indonesia to make an effective ways and good regulation about the election during the pandemic in order to make the increasing good democracy and stop the spread the virus COVID in Indonesia. As can be seen, the research would recommend the citizens, especially students of Indonesia, should collaborating with the government to break the chain of spreading COVID in Indonesia. And then the research personally recommend that Indonesia students should aware about the pandemic and supporting every act they aim to break off chain of COVID-19 and more care about democracy in Indonesia. And the last is reference. This is the reference that I use to make a paper presentation. And this is the last from me. That's all from me. If you find many mistake, please forgive me. The last I say, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And thank you for attention. Goodbye.